This is Charlene Margot from the Parent Venture. We welcome you to tonight's town hall sponsored by Sequoia Healthcare District. Welcome, Gareth.
Thank you, Charlene, and thank you, Pamela. I appreciate the nice introduction. Tonight, we're going to talk about some issues that are near and dear to my heart, and that is home fire safety, defensible space, and then the concept of home hardening. And that's a concept that we're going to talk about, and I'm going to show you some pictures of how it's actually worked and saved homes that have been exposed to wildland fires. So I've got a PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to share. All right. So the plan this evening is I'm going to go through these slides. We're going to talk about concepts. And at the end, we're going to have time for questions and answers. If we have more questions than we have time to answer, I'm going to give you information on how you can contact my office and resources that you can get online on our city's website. So I'll give you all that information at the end. But if you can keep track of any questions that you might have, we'll try and save them up for the end. So without any further ado, let's get talking. So the objectives of this training tonight are to expand your individual awareness of fire safety principles, primarily around your home, to increase your understanding of defensible space requirements. In other words, what are they and where and when are they required? And then we're going to discuss the concept of home hardening and really what does that mean? And we're going to talk a little bit about what it costs and how you can get that done to improve the chances of your home surviving exposure to a wildland fire. So we're going to start with just some staggering statistics. And, you know, as a fire marshal, what I am responsible for is the Fire Prevention Bureau. And by definition, what we're trying to do is reduce the losses. We're trying to prevent fires from happening. The United States, for an industrialized nation, has the highest per capita fire death rate of any country in the world. Last year, according to the United States Fire Administration, over 3,500 people died last year in residential structure fires. And the interesting demographic is that folks over 55 or older have the greatest risk of dying in a fire. And for an industrialized nation as advanced as we are, those kinds of statistics are just staggering. And what can we do about it? Well, we can actually do a lot about it. The other thing interesting is that males are 1.7 times more likely to die in fires. And that statistic of 3,500 people, those were primarily residential structure fires, although obviously we have many different types of fires out there. These are people dying in homes. Just in the last few years in Redwood City alone, we've had 3 fire deaths, and that's just over the last few years. All 3 were in residential structure fires. All 3 could have been prevented. And we have lockup of my computer. Not letting me advance the slides.
Uh-oh. Gareth, do you want to unshare and then share again?
Sure, I'll try that.
Thank you, everybody, for your patience. Just a little technical stuff. We will get going again.
Okay.
Okay.
So everyone sees my screen. We're back in business. Excellent. Thanks, Charlene. So what we're going to talk about in residential structure fires, the top 5 causes are cooking at 49%, open flames, heating, incendiary or arson fires, and then smoking. And so we're going to talk about these. And first off, we're going to talk about smoke detectors. Smoke detectors have gone through significant improvements over the years. And there's been a number of studies that have shown that older smoke detectors are ineffective in waking the very young and the elderly, just because of the noise, the frequency spectrum that they put out. And so modern day smoke detectors, just by virtue of the fact that they're new, are producing a sound that has been proven effective on older adults and younger children. And so it's amazing when you see these studies in elderly folks and little kids sleeping with the smoke detector going off right above them. It's pretty amazing. The other significant issue is because the concept of the technology improving every 10 years, all of the modern day smoke detectors that are available on the market are 10-year smoke detectors. They are self-contained. They do not have a replaceable battery, and they come with a 10-year lithium battery. They have a long shelf life. They're 10 years from when they're put in service. They should have, every home should have one in every room that can be used for sleeping, and then one outside sleeping rooms in any hallways that are feeding sleeping rooms, with at least one smoke detector per floor. Now, these are single station battery operated smoke detectors. You can put them everywhere. They don't require any power. Most homes built since the early 90s have hardwired interconnected smoke detectors, which means that if one goes off anywhere in the house, they all go off. So in addition to smoke detectors, you also need to have carbon monoxide detectors. Carbon monoxide detector is one of those silent killers, because the concept of carbon monoxide poisoning is that it displaces your oxygen carrying capacity of your hemoglobin cells. So in other words, your red blood cells no longer can carry oxygen when they are carrying carbon monoxide. And so carbon monoxide is odorless, tasteless. It dissolves in air, which means that if you have carbon monoxide, you're going to have it at the floor and you're going to have it at the ceiling. If you have an attached garage, you need to have one. If you have any fuel burning appliances in your home, even if it's just a fireplace or gas stoves or gas furnaces, you need to have one. And the nice thing is that many manufacturers make combination smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. So you need to have one at least on every floor of your home. Kitchen fire safety. We've talked about the fact that kitchen fires are the #1 cause. Almost 50% of all residential structure fires are caused by cooking fires. And just some general principles: don't leave any pots unattended. Keep combustibles away from the stove, including pot holders and paper towel dispensers, any cleaners that might be flammable. Make sure that you're not wearing any clothing that can catch fire. And then if you do deep fry, make sure that you have a tight fitting lid available in case your grease or your oil ignites. In the fast food industry, they transitioned away from animal fats, lard, to vegetable oils. And the reason they did that is the perception is it's healthier, but they also have a much higher temperature that they fry the food at. That way their batches, their recovery, they're able to get a lot more production. But what it means is that when they do overheat and flash, it's at a much higher temperature and can cause a significant amount of damage. There was a little fire up in Truckee where a woman had a pot of oil on the stove. It caught fire. So she picked up the pot, put it in the sink, turned the water on. And what happens when you put water into a burning grease fire? It significantly exacerbates the fire. And in this particular case, it caused an explosion that killed her, blew out the windows, and it was all from putting water onto a pot of burning oil. So the bottom line is, have a tight fitting lid available right next to your stove, put it on top if it catches on fire, turn off the heat and let it cool down. We are having a public safety fair on the 18th in San Carlos. And we're going to actually do a cooking demo where we're going to ignite a pan of oil and we're going to pour some water into it so that you can see what happens in a very controlled environment. So if any of you are interested, come on out to the Public Safety Day on the 18th in San Carlos, and it ought to be a fun, we're going to do it 3 times during the day. And then of course, candles. And candles are the leading cause of open flame fires. Don't leave any candles unattended. Keep them away from combustibles. Don't have candles on combustible surfaces, and then ensure that your candles can't fall over. Everyone understands how close we are up to a very large fault, that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when the San Andreas is going to go off again. And so ensure that your candles can't fall over. Electrical fires. Most older homes don't have the electrical capacity for our modern day electronics. And so most everybody is utilizing extension cords, multi-plug adapters. And if you think about the concept of a multi-plug adapter, it's easy to overload one circuit in your building by having too much of a load put onto it. And so by having a multi-plug adapter, you're now adding all of that additional current load to the one socket that it's plugged into. And we have numerous homes throughout San Carlos and Redwood City that still have very old knob and tube wiring even, and very low amounts of current designed into their capacity. So they're easy to overload. I just found out a friend of mine last night, his home burned down in Mill Valley in Marin because he was having a new roof put on and the contractors plugged in a large compressor into his home, and his home was built in the 30s. It overloaded the electrical circuit and caught fire in the wall and burned up his house. And that just happened last night. So this is real, and don't overload electrical circuits. With extension cords, they're designed for temporary use only. Don't leave your Christmas lights out all year. Don't run extension cords under furniture or across doorways where they can get crushed. Every home should have a fire extinguisher. There's essentially 4 different categories of fires: A, B, C, and D. A is ordinary combustibles like paper, wood. B is oil fires. C is for energized electrical, and D is something very rare, flammable metals. But in reality, most fire extinguishers have an ABC rating, and that's what you want. The ABC rating means you can use that on electrical fires, oil fires, and you can use it on ordinary combustible fires. And the concept of using a fire extinguisher, I wish I had the time to give you a demo. We are going to have fire extinguisher demos at our Public Safety Day, but the concept is to pull the pin, aim the nozzle at the base of the flames, squeeze the handle, and then sweep across the base of the flames. Since they have a Class B rating, the concept of using them on a grease fire on your stovetop is something that we frequently get questions about, because reality is they can extinguish it, but they're going to blow hot burning grease all over the place. So you're much better with a pot on the stove grease fire, utilizing a tight fitting lid and shutting the heat off and letting it cool down. But having a fire extinguisher gives you the option. And then finally, for home fire safety, have a plan. We call it EDITH, which is exit drills in the home, but it's no 2 ways out of every room, especially sleeping rooms. And by law in California, any room used for sleeping has to have what we call, from a code standpoint, an emergency escape and rescue opening. Basically, it's a window or a sliding door that would allow you to have a second way out. And so ensure everyone knows 2 ways out of every room, out a window or out the door. And designate a gathering place so that everybody can be accountable when they've left the house. Everybody knows who's in and who's out. And then have drills, practice it. Both scheduled drills and unscheduled drills. Set off a smoke detector and make sure that everybody gets out and meets at the designated gathering place. In my career, I can't tell you how many folks I've seen perish in fires where they did not have working smoke detectors. They did not have carbon monoxide detectors. And it just breaks my heart where technology could have easily solved that problem. You know, we're not going to talk about it during this presentation, but fire sprinklers are something that the state of California adopted a requirement, and we certainly require every new home to be sprinklered. Reality is 3,500 people died. No one has died in a fully sprinklered residence with working smoke detectors. And so what these systems do is notify you that they're going off and keep a fire from going flash over and give you the opportunity to get out. So I'm going to get off my soapbox about sprinklers. We don't have a lot of time, so I just want to make sure we touch on it. Finally, in the event of a fire, leave, get out, close the door behind you. And that is for bedroom doors, front doors. Get out. As you're getting out, bring your phone, call 911 from outside. If the smoke detectors go off, evacuate. And once you're out, stay out. Don't go back into a burning building for any of your possessions or pets. And then notify fire department personnel when they arrive on scene about everyone that could be in the building, and certainly anyone that might be unaccounted for. And so in my career, I've seen many fires. One of them, there was a fire in this home that was in the back of the home. It was a kitchen. We got on scene, everybody was outside. We opened the door, got ready to go in, bring a hose line in and go put the fire out. The smoke was all the way down to the floor. It was a very hot fire, and the occupant ran past us back into the house, into the burning home. I don't even know why. My conjecture is that he went in to try and save something, try and get some possessions. And the smoke was all the way down to the floor, very hot, dark, very dangerous fire. And now we had to search for him. And unfortunately, we found him and we're not able to resuscitate him. So in my career, there's a lot of stories that exemplify each of these issues that we're talking about. All right, moving away from home fire safety now, or at least moving into the concept of defensible space. Defensible space is a concept of disrupting the continuity of fuels from the wildland area, so the vegetation, to your home. And so it's a concept of disrupting both the vertical and horizontal continuity of fuels, meaning the fire runs out of fuel before it gets to your house. And the idea is to provide a buffer all the way around your home of any combustible vegetation. Now, that does not mean bare dirt all the way around your home. You can still have landscaping, but it means not a continuous fuel bed. And we're going to talk about that more. And I've got some pictures that I'll show you. One of the things about everything we're going to talk about relative to defensible space and home hardening is all of it improves the chances of your home surviving from exposure to a wildland fire. None of it guarantees it. Your homes are still built out of wood, and the reality is Mother Nature is pretty powerful. And if the wind is driving a fire towards your home, the chances of survival are much better if you have adequate defensible space and all the home hardening techniques we're going to talk about, but nothing guarantees that your home will survive. When we send our resources into an area that's threatened by fire, we do something called structure triage. And structure triage is, we have limited resources, 5 engines on a strike team, and we're going to look at a neighborhood and we're going to decide which homes are we going to make a stand at because they have good defensible space around it. And so having defensible space passively can improve the chances of the home surviving, but also actively, because we're going to commit a fire engine to that home because it has a better chance of surviving because it has adequate defensible space. So why do we need defensible space? Well, the concept is to avoid ignition of your home. And the reality is, if your home ignites, 90% of the time, it is a total loss. And so we want to ensure that the home doesn't ignite. And so the concept is for the home to be passively resistant. What I mean by that is that it doesn't require a fire truck in the driveway and a hose line there. Where I came from in Tahoe, we had a little fire in 2007 called the Angora Fire. When I say little, in the grand scheme of some of the mega fires we're having nowadays in California, this was only a 3,000 acre fire, but it burned to the ground, absolutely consumed 254 homes. And it burned so hot that all of the pipes in the homes melted into the ground. So the County Environmental Health considered the ground contaminated with heavy metals because of the galvanized and copper pipes that melted into the ground. An absolute complete consumption of everything standing, with some exceptions. And the interesting thing is, in the area where the Angora fire burned, we had sent our defensible space inspectors out and wrote up corrective notices for homes throughout the area where the Angora fire burned. And of those homes that completed the prescriptive defensible space work, in other words, the trees that needed to be thinned, the trees that needed to be removed, all of the things we're going to talk about in just a minute, those folks that did every bit of what we told them to do, and then our inspectors went out and signed off on them, and that was earlier in the year when the Angora fire occurred, 75% of them survived. And so you'd have absolute moonscape with homes sitting there that survived. Why did they survive? Well, they were the homes that actually did that defensible space work. And so what this means is that the concepts I'm talking about have been proven to be effective to improve the chances of your home surviving. So the concept of defensible space is to have 3 zones around your property. Now, I know this picture there only shows 2 zones because currently the code, Public Resources Code, section 4291, only requires 2 zones, but it will be changing. And by January 1st, there will be a 3-zone requirement. And the first zone being from your house and out 5 feet, non-combustible. So no bushes up against your home, nothing that can ignite and then expose your home. And then from 5 feet out to 30 feet, what we call the lean, clean, and green zone, where you have manicured lawns, for instance, and I know, dare I say that in these drought conditions, but manicured lawns are very resistant to fire. But you can have landscaping there, just not any continuity to the fuels. You can have single species. So if they do ignite, they're burning by themselves and they're not transmitting fire ahead of them. And then from 30 foot out to 100 foot or the property line, that's where you're reducing the fuels. So you're in areas that are have a lot of trees. You don't want interconnected canopies. You want to have some disruption in the canopies of the trees. You want to ensure that the fuel is reduced when compared to, say, the unmanaged wildland areas that the fires typically are going to come from. And so these are some of the very specific requirements in the law: removing any portion of a tree that extends within 10 feet of the outlet of a chimney or stovepipe. Now, these pictures that you're seeing on these slides, I drove around town taking pictures. So these come from Redwood City and St. Carlos. And these are real. These are properties that we have written corrective notices on. And we are inspecting all properties west of Alameda de las Pulgas. So in both cities, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, also are the areas that are our very high fire hazard severity zones. And I'll talk a little more about what that is in a minute. As you can see, in the event there was a fire in a fireplace, it could easily ignite the vegetation outside the chimney. Maintain any tree, shrub, or this picture was right there off of Edgewood, but maintain any tree, shrub, or other plant adjacent to or overhanging free of dead or dying wood. So overhanging a building free of dead or dying wood. So in other words, what you see in this picture where the trees and the home are one continuous fuel bed, if the trees are on fire, the home's on fire. And it works both ways. Defensible space protects the wildland and therefore the neighborhoods from a structure fire that spreads out into the wildland area. Maintain the roof of a structure free of leaves, needles, or other vegetative material. Roofing material has different classifications. You can have Class A materials, and you can also have Class A roofing assembly. And all that means, it doesn't mean it can't ignite. It just means that it is, and literally a Class A brand is about 1.5 feet square of lattice wood when placed on top of the roof surface doesn't create enough heat release to ignite the roofing material. So we essentially have Class A, B, and C roofs. Most of our roofs, certainly in the areas designated as fire hazard severity zones, are Class A roofs. Doesn't mean they're non-combustible, just means they'll withstand a significant amount of fire before they ignite. Having receptive fuel beds in the form of leaves, needles, or other vegetative materials built up on your roofs, like in the valleys on the picture on the screen. Think about the concept of burning brands landing on there and igniting all that. And that is a greater fuel load than a Class A burning brand, and therefore has enough energy, enough heat release rate to ignite your home on fire, just from your buildup of leaves, needles, and other vegetative material. Make sure that the outlet to every chimney or stovepipe that's attached to a fireplace, stove, or any other devices that burns any solid or liquid fuel has a screen over it with an absolute minimum of 1/2 inch, although it's much better if they're down to 1/4 inch. This one was right on Alameda de las Pulgas, open wood burning fireplace chimney with no cap on it, no screen on it, obviously open to the weather. Those folks said they don't use their fireplace, but the code, the law in California doesn't ask the question, well, are you using it? So we did write them a correction notice to put a screen on there, put a cap on there and a screen. Don't store combustible materials underneath your combustible decks. Not a good place to store your firewood, because all it takes is one little burning brand to get in there and ignite that pile. Now your deck's on fire and your home's gone. And then eliminating the concept of laddering fuels. And laddering fuels is a concept where if we do have a fire burning on the ground, we don't want the continuity of fuels vertically to get up into the tops of the trees and then carry fire through the crowns of the trees. And we can eliminate that by keeping a ground fire on the ground by limbing up low-hanging branches off the ground, a minimum of 1/3 the height of the tree. And so on mature trees, they should be limbed up a minimum of 6 feet, making sure that you don't have a good fuel bed underneath So maintain the ground cover by removing dead leaves underneath. We don't want a bunch of lollipop trees, but the reality is a running crown fire, and in Lake Tahoe, the Angora fire started on the ground, burned up into the crowns of the trees, and then became what we call a running crown fire. And the fire burns extremely hot, extremely fast, and throws a large amount of burning brands ahead of it with the wind. And so by keeping the fire out of the tops of the trees, you're going to slow the spread of it, giving your fire department better opportunity to extinguish it. Remove and clear all flammable vegetation or combustible growth within 10 feet on each side of the driveway or roadways. Now, these slides were originally a deck of 60 just on defensible space, not including home hardening and not including the fire safety slides we talked about. So I got lots of other pictures of this, but the concept is to provide you safe egress. Think of your driveways and roadways as fire breaks, and to ensure that you don't have vegetation right up next to your driveways or your roadways. And this is all not just recommendations, this is all state law. Make sure that you have a visible address from the street. You may not get your Redwood City or San Carlos firefighters responding to your house. You may get folks from way out of the area who are not familiar, and they may be dispatched to an address, but if they can't identify it from the street, you may not get help, whether it's for a fire or for even a medical aid. So make sure that you have readily identifiable, high contrast, reflective address that is visible from the street. So now these are some pictures of what we're talking about after a fire's come through, and you can see that the defensible space worked. These are homes that were saved after exposure to a wildland fire. And I just love these pictures because I can talk till I'm blue in the face about theory on how and why these work and why you should have defensible space. But boy, a picture sure tells 1,000 words, because here are situations where fire came through and defensible space saved the homes. So these pictures here all were homes that were saved without a fire engine in the driveway to protect it. They were all passively saved due to their construction techniques, home hardening, and defensible space. So as you can see, this property has very nice landscaping, green lawns all the way around, and it has a buffer, literally, of dirt out there where the fire ran out of fuel before it even got onto their property, and the home was saved. Now, this is one of my favorites. This has a Class A roof. You can see it's a metal roof, and you can see that there is defensible space around it, even though fire is right up next to the building. Here's the aftershot. And again, these homes were passively protected by the home hardening techniques we're going to talk about in a minute, and defensible space. So let's talk about fire hazard severity zones. The state of California in 2009 ranked the entire state on fire hazard severity, and it ranked it from the highest being extreme, but anything that's very high fire hazard severity does require specific home hardening techniques for anything that's built. And so your Redwood City and San Carlos fire departments, we cover Redwood City and San Carlos and a portion of the county down in the North Fair Oaks area. And as you can see on the screen, this is the map of the very high fire hazard severity zones. In the Emerald Lake Hills area, that's all a high, very fire hazard severity zone. And so what does that translate to? In 2007, codes were adopted by the state of California that became effective January 1 that required ignition resistant construction throughout the entire state. Now, those fire hazard severity zone maps we have available on our public facing GIS portal. So you can go to our city's website and you can punch up your address and you can see if your home is in a fire hazard severity zone or not. But know that if your home's west of Alameda de Las Pulgas in either city, that for the most part, you're in one. And what does it mean if you're in one? It means that anything that's built there has to have the home hardening techniques and the construction methods that we're going to talk about in just a minute. And so the concept of defensible space, home hardening significantly increases the survivability of a structure passively when exposed to a wildland fire. And so here's the home hardening. Class A roofs. And Class A roofs mean that it will withstand a significant amount of heat before it can ignite. Non-combustible exterior wall surfaces. So many homes that are stucco, for instance, is non-combustible exterior wall. There's many different types of exterior wall coverings, cement board, and all kinds of things that won't ignite when they're exposed. Venting is a pretty significant issue because it allows, in normal vents, the intrusion of burning embers and flames into dry wooden attics and subfloor areas. So vents that resist that intrusion of burning embers and flames, and they're done a number of different ways. They have versions that are coated in something called intumescent paint, which means if they're heated up, the paint swells up and seals them off. Or there are vents that essentially have almost a honeycomb. There are other vents where the embers have to kind of go up, down, and then up again to get in, and they drop to the bottom. They also restrict flames from getting in. Solid core exterior doors. For the most part, all of our solid exterior doors are going to be solid core anyway. Non-combustible interface with fences. So what does that mean? Well, most fences tie into the side of your house. Fences are very easy to ignite, and they're going to carry fire right up to your house. So the concept is that interface from where the fence connects to your house should be non-combustible. Frequently, metal is used to stop that continuity of fuels from the fence burning your house down. Double pane tempered windows. What that means is one of the panes in all windows on the exterior of your home has to have tempered glass in it. We have energy code requirements that are going to require double pane windows anyway. And so ensuring that one of those panes is tempered is not going to cost that much more money. And we already have that requirement for any windows that are, for instance, near stairs or doors, already required to have tempered glass there. But the concept is there's a number of different ways that heat is transferred in a wildland fire. And radiant heat will simply shatter a normal glazing that's not tempered glass window and allow the intrusion of flames and burning embers into your home, which will ignite your home. So the concept of home hardening includes making sure that you have double pane tempered glass windows, fire resistant decking surfaces. There was a fire in a home that was owned by the president of Mexico, who had the first house as you come into Tahoe Keys. Beautiful home, right on Tahoe Keys on one side, Lake Tahoe on the other, right on the water. But he had a deck fire, and the fire burned all the way around from one end of the house to the other because it was a Trex deck. And Trex has different versions of their decking material. They have a version specifically rated for areas that need to, that are in a wildland urban interface that need to have fire resistant decking, and they won't carry fire. It looks the same, but it is treated with a fire resistant chemical in the plastic to keep it from propagating flames. But normal standard decking material carries flame really, really well. So we want to ensure that your decks are fire resistant. Boxing in and enclosing your eaves. The eaves have a very small block to keep fire and embers and flames from getting into your attic. So by boxing them in, and we even have new technology that eliminates the need for venting. And why do you have venting on a home? Well, when you have a difference in temperature, you can create an issue of mold because of the condensation. And by venting it, now you're venting out that condensation. So there are ways to insulate the underside of your roof, for instance, so that your attic area is at the same temperature as your home. And therefore you don't have that temperature differential. Therefore you don't have the buildup of any condensation. Therefore you don't need venting. And with a boxed in eave, it dramatically improves the chances of surviving. And then the concept of elimination of receptive fuel beds adjacent to your structure, that's that first zone in the defensible space between 0 and 5 feet of not having any vegetation or anything else that could ignite next to your structure. And then finally, defensible space. So the concept of home hardening includes all of these issues. Anybody heard of the Camp Fire? Camp Fire was in 2018. There were 18,000 homes or structures lost there with 85 deaths. And the community burned so fast that people couldn't get out. A number of the deaths were folks in their cars trying to escape. Unfortunately, this fire was driven so hard by the weather, by the wind, by the fuels, that folks didn't even have the time to evacuate. But as you can see from this picture on your screen, there were homes that survived. And this picture was taken through a home that was destroyed, looking at a home that is completely, fully intact with no damage. And why did it survive, you ask? Because any home built in a fire hazard severity zone since 2008 had to incorporate in all of those concepts that we talked about for home hardening. And so this particular home was relatively new, and it was built to the home hardening specifications in the building code, chapter 7A, and it survived. It survived on its own when all around it was absolute devastation. So wildfire spread, burning embers being carried by the wind ahead of the main body of the fire, is one of the biggest issues of igniting structures. During the Caldor fire, which occurred a year ago, my home in South Lake Powell we had to be evacuated. But during that fire, we had a probability of ignition, which we have a number of, we call them adjectives, but they're basically a number of ratings for things during a fire to forecast what the fire spread is going to be in a fire. And the probability of ignition was 95%, meaning during the Caldor fire, when a burning brand lands on a receptive fuel bed, 95% of the time it's going to ignite it. And so the fire started way down below Placerville in the Grizzly Flats area, and it burned all the way up to Heavenly. It was throwing burning brands miles ahead of it, carried by the wind. And so the concept of not having anything around your structure that can ignite, if they were subject to an absolute pouring rain of little red dots. And that is the way it was during the Angora fire. It was absolute pouring rain of red dots. So anything that could ignite was igniting. And when you have a POI that high, it's pretty difficult if you have anything around your home because they're all going to ignite. So the key to reducing the effect of, we call it ember cast, is eliminate those receptive fuel beds around your home. And even with defensible space, you still have the probability of ignition to consider of anything that's combustible. So I'm sure everyone's aware of the 100 million plus dead trees in Northern California. And so why do we have so many dead trees? Well, we certainly have been in a drought for a number of years, and we've not managed the trees properly because fire is natural in the wilderness, typically starts by lightning. And there is a concept of fire ecology that reduces vegetation. Plus, we, as the fire service in general, extinguish fires. And as a result, what we've ended up with is extremely dense forests. And during drought conditions, those trees are all competing for the limited resources in the ground, the water and nutrients. And when there isn't enough nutrients for all of the vegetation, what you end up with is beetle kills, because the beetles on a healthy tree, when they bore in, and they're only about the size of a grain of rice, the tree secretes sap that seals the hole and kills the beetle. But on these stressed trees, they don't have the ability to secrete the sap and stop the invasion and intrusion by the beetles. We do have a significant amount of trees throughout the two cities, Redwood City and San Carlos, where if you look at the base of the tree, you may see 1,000 holes around the base of the tree. Every one of those is a beetle that's bored into it. And because the trees are stressed, they don't have the ability to fight off these beetles. And once you have enough beetles in there, it disrupts the ability for the tree to get water and nutrients up to the top from the ground, its root structure, and the tree dies. And so the concept of removing 100 million dead trees, obviously it's very impractical. There are no, a healthy tree has a timber harvest value that can be pretty significant on these large trees, but there is no timber harvest value to dead, rotten, beetle-killed trees. And there just is no funding. We have some resources available. The Fire Safe San Mateo County Council has a document called Living with Fire in San Mateo County that goes over everything that we've been talking about as far as defensible space, but it is specific to San Mateo County in that the fuel models are based on the fuel models that we have here in the county. And so this document is available on our website, and I'll give that to you in just a minute. You can download it for free directly from our website. We can also send out links if need be, and I'll give you my email at the end of the presentation. So if you'd like me to email you a copy of this directly, just send me an email. But again, everything's on our website. And then the state of California has a website called readyforwildfire.org. And the concept of ready, set, go is ready, meaning prepare your property before a fire with defensible space and home hardening. Set being in the event that there is now the threat of a wildfire, get set, get ready to evacuate. And so what do you need to do to prepare in case you have to evacuate? And then go. In other words, evacuating, and what should you do? And as you can see in this little picture there, he's got a ladder to the roof, got a garden hose sitting there, got a bucket of water and all that. And that's all stuff to help firefighters. So Ready, Set, Go is a really good program, and there's lots of information on readyforwildfire.org. All of these are available on our website, in addition to about a dozen other documents on defensible space and home hardening and links. So with that, I'm going to kind of turn it back over to Charlene to moderate some questions if we still have time. But here's my contact information. gharris@redwoodcity.org, and my phone number is on the bottom, as well as a link to our city's website. If you go to fire prevention off the city's website, go to fire and then fire prevention, you'll see we have a whole section devoted to wildfire prevention, and with lots and lots of good information and good links on there. So with that, I'll take a breath and turn it over to Charlene.
Well, thank you so much, Fire Marshal Gareth Harris. My head is spinning with all of that information and all of those pictures of homes that made it and didn't make it. You know, we live in these beautiful tree-lined suburbs, but there's a downside to that, isn't there?
Yeah.
Oh boy. So Gareth, a couple of questions, and Pamela, if you're still with us, you might have a couple comments. I'm not sure if she's still online. Pamela, please join us if you are, but otherwise, a few questions for you. One is, people are asking, many folks have conflicts with their neighbors about tree coverage, you know, at the line of the property. What can you do if a neighbor has a tree that's on your roof and you would like them to remove it? Can you ask for, you know, backup from the fire department? What should a person do if they have that problem?
You know, that's an excellent question. And if you think about the concept of trespassing, the tree is trespassing on your property from your neighbor's property. So you do have civil recourse to compel your neighbor to cut back that tree that is encroaching on your property. And also you have the ability to cut back that tree, even though it's not your tree. Now, all that being said, it's much better to work with your neighbor. It's much better to create a partnership with your neighbors so that you're improving the fire safety for the community for both of your homes. And so, yes, the fire department can help facilitate that communication between the two, can help educate. The phone number's on there. I have a bureau of fire inspectors we can send out to take a specific look at it. If you're in an area outside of the Redwood City or San Carlos fire departments, call your local fire department. I know we have some folks from Menlo Park and East Palo Alto and things, but call your local fire department and they will be able to come out with a defensible space inspector and take a look at it and make the call on whether or not it's a fire safety issue. And we have access to GIS to determine whose property it is next door to you. And so I know we've had folks that don't even know who owns the property next door to them. So we've helped facilitate contacting the two property owners, and you know, we're encouraging working together in collaboration on getting the issues mitigated. But you know, reality is this is all state law that we're talking about. So you know, we'd much rather use the carrot than the hammer, but we can issue citations for you know, violations of defensible spaces requirements.
Thank you. That's really, really important information to know. We have a question here from Karen, who's asking about the appropriate size of venting covers. She says our local hardware store wants to carry the appropriate size, but says there isn't full agreement yet on what the size of the spacing should be. Another one of our panelists noted that lumber yards such as OK Lumber, Bruce Bauer do carry supplies necessary for that. Do you have a comment again on the appropriate size, finding appropriate size venting covers?
So I guess I'll try and explain the issue, but maybe a little bit of clarification. So venting for attic space, for subfloor areas, that is a matter of having adequate air exchange based on the square footage. And so the vents that are designed for home hardening are more restrictive. So you're going to need more of them, and you're going to need bigger versions of them in order to have adequate venting to meet the air exchange requirements to reduce the condensation that can create mold. If that's not what you're referring to, if what you're referring to is a chimney cap, the code says right now, 1/2 inch openings for chimney caps. So if that's what you're referring to as venting, there is a requirement, the code calls them a screen, but it's a minimum of 1/2 inch.
All right, thank you. So now we have come to the end of our hour, and I would like to pass it back to Pamela Kurtzman, the CEO of Sequoia Healthcare District, for some final comments.
Well, I'm still blown away that every time I hear something around this topic, I learn something new. And Gareth, you are such a great presenter, and I have a friend who's online here texting me saying, we've got to get this information out on Nextdoor, and we should send this out and have contest around defensible space. And if somebody our community could have a contest on who has the best defensible space and give us a prize. So people are like really excited and enthusiastic about this topic, but it doesn't get out enough. And that's why we're here to help in any way we can to expand the capacity of our fire departments, our cities, all of our public information that get out there and help protect the community. And so, Gareth, I just thank you so much for this information, and great presenter. And I don't want to take any more time if somebody else has anything else. I know we're done, but wonderful. And this will be recorded. This is recorded and will be available on your website, right? Charlene, tell us a little more about that.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Pamela. As Pamela Kurtzman said, this event has been recorded and will be available soon on our video library, which is a free YouTube channel open to the community. And again, Fire Marshal Gareth Harris, we cannot thank you enough. As Pamela Kurtzman said, this was a wonderful presentation. We've all learned so much. Now we need to go and figure all this out about defensible space and landscaping. But thank you for an amazing presentation. And thank you, Pamela, for your sponsorship, and to Sequoia Healthcare District. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Good night. Stay well. Stay safe. See you soon.
Stay safe. Okay,
Good night, everyone.